Hi, guys. How are you?
It's the final
3 chapters,
countdown.
which means this is going to be a longer show.
We are going to rush through this tonight because as much as we love Clive Barker, as much as I love Clive Barker,
this is a lot.
We're done. We are done with this. We need to move on.
I mean, we have the Books of Blood too.
Yeah, those stories are actually as long.
I know. Plus, other people want to do other things. So here we go.
Let's do this.
So I'm going to start this off with warning. The following video contains explicit language which may be offensive to some viewers and or inappropriate for children. The content within this video is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer and listener discretion is advised.
Hey, Calvin. Hey, Connor. Titties.
Hey, Sharon. Hey, Calvin. Hey, Connor.
What's going on?
How's it going?
Boobies.
I know. Titties. So. I got lazy and just put a hoodie on instead of any clothing.
Yep.
I mean, be surprised I have makeup on right now. Because, that almost didn't happen, too.
Yeah.
But I really wanted to do bright orange. To go with the pumpkins.
Huh?
To go with the pumpkins.
Take off the pumpkins?
To go with the pumpkins.
Oh.
Bright orange.
All right.
So,
let's get through this.
Woo!
3 more chapters.
Oh, have fun at your haunt.
Oh, cool.
I've been seeing her pictures. She looks great.
Yeah.
Love
the haunt actors do. See, here in California, we're not allowed to do anything fun right now.
Hey, Carol.
Hey, Carol. Yep.
How are you?
All
right. So, chapter 8. There was thunder that night.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you. There was thunder that night, a storm without rain, which made the air smell of steel. Kirsty had never slept well, even as a child. Though her mother had known lullabies enough to pacify nations, the girl had never found slumber easily. It wasn't that she had bad dreams, or at least none that lingered until morning. It was that sleep itself, the act of closing the eyes and relinquishing control of her consciousness, was something she was temperamentally unsuited to. Tonight, with the thunder so loud and the lightning so bright, she was happy. She had an excuse to forsake her tangled bed and drink tea and watch the spectacle from her window.
I'm drinking beers.
I'm nothing right now. I'm doing nothing.
Sorry.
Why are you apologizing?
I don't know.
All right. So tonight, with the thunder so loud and the lightning so bright, she was very happy. She had an excuse to forsake her tangled bed and drink tea and watch the spectacle from her window. It gave her time to think as well. Time to turn over the problem that had vexed her since leaving the house on Ludovico Street. But she was still no nearer an answer. One particular doubt nagged. Suppose she was wrong about what she'd seen. Suppose she'd misconstrued the evidence, and Julia had a perfectly good explanation. She would lose Rory at a stroke. And yet, how could she remain silent? She couldn't bear to think of the woman laughing behind his back, exploiting his geniality. Geniality.
I was like, genealogy. I was like, this is...
Genealogy.
Barker got dark.
Not genealogy.
I know.
Genealogy. Like congenial?
Yeah.
His naivete. The thought made her blood boil. The only other option was to wait and watch, to see if she could gain some incontrovertible evidence. If her worst suppositions were then confirmed, she would have no choice but to tell Rory what she'd seen. Yes, that was the answer. Wait and watch and wait. The thunder rolled around for long hours, denying her sleep until nearly 4. When, finally, she did sleep, it was the slumber of a watcher and a waiter, light and full of sighs. The storm made a ghost train. I'm sorry. The storm made a ghost train. It says that. It actually says that.
Oh, Alan Keyes, everybody. Could have used the ghost train. I fucking love Rick and Morty.
She thinks you're being dirty about taking off pumpkins.
No, these pumpkins right here.
The two big pumpkins. No, I want to listen to Elvira, Two Big Pumpkins now.
I want to go listen to freaking Final Countdown now. It's like stuck in my head.
Apparently. All right, so I lost my spot.
Sorry.
The storm made a ghost train of the house. Julia sat downstairs and counted the beats between the flash and the fury that came on its heels. She had never liked thunder. She, a murderess, a consorter with the living dead. It was another paradox to add to the 1,000 she'd found at work in herself of late. She thought more than once of going upstairs and taking some comfort with the prodigy. What? But knew that it would be unwise. Rory might turn at a moment from his office party, or might return.
Return. Just for a moment.
No, look how it's written.
I know. It's their English.
Might return. No, he put the dash there and put it on the next thing. At a moment from his office party, he would be drunk on past experience and full of unwelcome fondness. Fondling.
Some unwelcome fondling.
Pretty much. The storm crept closer. She put on the television to block out the din, which it scarcely did.
Sorry. What happened? Oh, cool. Oh, yeah.
To block out the din, which it scarcely did. At 11, Rory came home, wreathed in smiles. He had good news. In the middle of the party, his supervisor had taken him to the side and commended him for his excellent work and had spoken of great things in the future. Julia listened to his retelling of the exchange, hoping that his inebriation would blind him to her indifference. At last, his news told, he threw off his jacket and sat down on the sofa beside her. Poor you, he said. You don't like the thunder. I'm fine, she said. Are you sure? Yes, I'm fine. He leaned across to her and nuzzled her. You're sweaty, she said, matter-of-factly. He didn't cease his overtures, however, unwilling to lower his baton now that he'd begun. Please, Rory, I don't want this. Well, why not? What did I do? Nothing. Pretending something interesting was on TV. You're fine. Oh, is that right? You're fine. I'm fine. Everybody's fucking fine.
Jesus Christ, man.
That was him.
I know. I'm saying, Jesus Christ, man. Hey, Andrew. Hello.
Hey. She stared at the flickering screen. The late evening news had just begun. The usual cup of sorrow full to the brimming. Rory talked on, drowning out the newscaster's voice with his diatribe. She didn't much mind. What did the world have to tell her? Little enough. Whereas she had news for the world that it would reel to hear. About the condition of the damned. About love lost. And then found. About what despair and desire have in common. Please, Julia, Rory was saying, just speak to me. The please demanded her attention. He looked, she thought, like the boy in the photographs, his body hirsute and bloated, his clothes, those of an adult, but still, in essence, a boy, with his bewildered gaze and sulky mouth. She remembered Frank's question, how could you have ever married such a dullard? Thinking of it, a sour smile creased her lips. He looked at her, his puzzlement deepening. What's so funny, damn you? Nothing. He shook his head, dull anger replacing the sulk. A peal of thunder followed the lightning, with barely a beat intervening. As it came, there was a noise from the floor above. She turned her attention back to the television to divert Rory's interest, but it was a vain attempt. He'd heard the sound. What the fuck was that? Thunder.
Fuck. I like doing that.
What?
No, it was responding to you. The fuck is that? The fuck is this? The fuck is that?
Fuck this.
The fuck is this?
It's the best meme ever. Fucking Abbott.
Day 28.
They still don't know I'm a dog.
They don't know I'm a dog.
I also like the snail one. Day 28. They still know I'm a snail.
With Behemoth.
With Behemoth. Hey! I haven't said hi to everybody.
You want to do that real quick?
So, hi, Andrew. Hi, Distortion. Hi, Damon Baird. I've said hi to everyone else, I believe. And I shall continue because we are getting through this fucking book tonight. Nice. So, the fuck was that? Thunder. He stood up. No, he said something else. He was already at the door. A dozen options raced through her head, none of them practical. He wrestled drunkenly with the door handle. Maybe I left a window open, she said, and got up. I'll go see. I can do that, he replied. I'm not totally inept. Nobody said, but he wasn't listening. As he stepped out into the hallway, the lightning came with the thunder loud and bright. As she went in pursuit of him, another flash came fast upon the first, accompanied by a bowel-rocking crash. Thunder that makes you shit yourself? What? Okay. Sure, buddy.
Yeah.
Whatever you say. But yes, bowel-rocking crash, guys.
Bowel-rocking crash, yeah.
Now I think Balrog. Balrog just comes in and...
Like Street Fighter?
No, like Lord of the Rings.
I was thinking Balrog from Street Fighter.
I was thinking the Balrog.
That just shows where we're at.
I was thinking Lord of the Rings.
I know. It's all... You shall not pause.
That was a badass scene.
But I was thinking Balrog from Street Fighter and, you know, beating the crap out of people and stuff like that. He just comes right in, boxing everybody.
Yeah, but you know what? I got like Ryu on my side and like
Ryu's awesome. He's like my favorite.
Hadouken!
He's downright fierce like a Hadouken. Get it? Downright fierce. Because that's the Hadouken.
Yes, the poem of the Jabberwocky.
Oh, okay. I was like, I heard of it first. I know what you're saying here, but I'm like, I don't.
My brain was not comprehending because I'm trying to read
like,
another British version.
Yeah.
We're all, sure, buddy.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Woo!
All right. So,
Balrog, you shall not pass.
Rory was already halfway up the stairs. It was nothing, she shouted after him. He made no reply, but climbed on the top of the stairs. She followed. Don't, she said to him, in a lull between a peal and the next. He heard her this time, or rather, chose to listen. When she reached the top of the stairs, he was waiting. Something wrong? She hid her trepidation behind a shrug. You're being silly, she replied softly. Am I? It was just the thunder. His face lit from the hall below. Suddenly softened. Why do you treat me like shit? He asked. You're just tired. Why, though? What have I ever done to you? It's all right, really, Rory. Everything's all right. The same hypnotic banalities over and over. Again, the thunder, and beneath the din, another sound. She cursed Frank's indiscretion. Rory turned and looked along the darkened landing. You hear that? He said. No. His limbs dogged by drink, he moved away from her. She watched him recede into the shadow. Lighting spilling through the open bedroom door. Flash lit him, then darkness again. He was walking towards the damp room, towards Frank. Wait, she said, and went after him. He didn't halt, but he covered the few yards to the door. As she reached him, his hand was closing on the handle. Inspired by panic, She reached out and touched his cheek. I'm afraid, she said. He looked around at her woozily. What of? She moved her hand to his lips, letting him taste the fear on her fingers. The storm, he said. She said. She could see the wetness of his eyes in the gloom a little more. He was swallowing the hook or spitting it out. Then, poor baby, he said. Swallowed, she elated, and reached down, put her hand over his, and drew it from the door. If Frank so much as breathed now, all was lost. Poor baby, he began to say again, and wrapped an embrace around her. His balance was not too good. He was a lead weight in her arms. Come on, she said, coaxing him away from the door. He went with her to a couple of stumbling paces and then lost his equilibrium. She let go of him and reached out to the wall for support. The lightning came again, and by it she saw his eyes had found her and glittered. I love you, he said, stepping across the hallway to where she stood. He pressed against her so heavily there was no resisting. His head went to the crook of her neck, muttering sweet talk into her skin. Now he was kissing her. She wanted to throw him off. More, she wanted to take him by his clammy hand and show him the death-defying monster he had been so close to stumbling across. But Frank wasn't ready for that confrontation. Not yet. All she could do was endure Rory's caresses and hope that exhaustion claimed him quickly. Why don't we go downstairs, she suggested. He muttered something into her neck and didn't move. His left hand was on her breast, the other clasped around her waist. She let him work his fingers beneath her blouse. To resist at this juncture would only inflame him afresh. I need you, he said, raising his mouth to her ear. Once, half a lifetime ago, her heart had seemed to skip at such a profession. Now she knew better. Her heart was no acrobat. There was no tingle in the coils of her abdomen, only the steady works of her body. Breath drawn, blood circulating, food pulped and purged. So she was bulimic?
So Taco Maniac wants to give us a cool dare, but
yes, we can see chat.
Can we see chat? I was like, can you say chat? My ADD just or my ADD. What's the other one where you read stuff backwards?
Dyslexia.
There you go. That kicked in. I was like, can we say chat?
To slow dance together. You know, honestly, if we had room, I probably would. But I have like, 50 pages to try to get through tonight.
But yeah, we have no room in the little studio we make inside of our
I'm
room.
all.
Yeah. There we go. That's as much as we can do.
Sorry, man.
We just did this.
Come on, wait, hold on. Let me see your arm. Let me see your arm for a second. Kingo.
Oh, your wrist pop.
Yes, it did.
Okay. There we go.
Okay. I lost my spot again.
Onwards.
All right.
Into infinity.
Thinking of her anatomy thus untainted by romanticism, as a collective of natural imperatives housed in muscle and bone, she found it easier to let him strip her blouse and put his face into her breasts. He motorboated her. Her nerve endings dutifully responded to his tongue, but again, it was merely an anatomy lesson. She stood back in the dome of her skull and was unmoved. He was unbuttoning himself now. She caught sight of his boastful plum as he stroked it against her thigh. Now he opened her legs and pulled her underwear down, just far enough to give him access. She made no objection, nor even a sound, as he made his entrance. His own den began almost immediately. Feeble claims to love and lust hopelessly tangled together. She half listened and let him work at his play, his face buried in her hair. Closing her eyes, she tried to picture better times, but the lightning spoiled her dreaming. As sound followed light, she opened her eyes again to see that the door of the damp room had been opened 2 or 3 inches. In the narrow gap between the door and the frame, she could just make out a glistening figure watching them. She could not see Frank's eyes, but she felt them sharpened beyond pricking by envy and rage. Nor did she look away. She stared on at the shadow while Rory's moans increased. And at the end, one moment became another. She was lying on the bed with her wedding dress crushed beneath her, while a black and scarlet beast crept up between her legs to give her a sample of its love. Poor baby, was the last thing Rory said as sleeping overcame him. He lay on the bed, still dressed. She made no attempt to strip him. When his snores were even, she left him and went back into the room. Frank was standing beside the window, watching the storm move to the southeast. He had torn the blind away. Lampshade washed the walls. He heard you, she said. I had to see the storm, he replied simply. I needed it. He almost found you, damn it. Frank shook his head. There's no such thing as almost, he said, still staring out the window. Then after a pause, I want to be out there. I want to have it all again. I know. No, you don't. You've no conception of the hunger I've got in me. Tomorrow, then, she said. I'll get another body tomorrow. Yes, you do that. And I want some other stuff. A radio, for one. I want to know what's going on out there. And food, proper food, fresh bread. Whatever you need. And ginger. The
ginger?
Preserved kind.
Oh.
You know, and syrup. I know. He glanced around at her briefly, but he wasn't seeing her. There was too much world to be reacquainted with tonight. I didn't realize it was autumn, he said. I went back to watching the storm.
Hey, Angie.
Hey, Angie. Chapter 9. 3 chapters, guys. So there was 4 chapters tonight. We're going to do this.
I know.
The first thing Kirsty noticed when she came around the corner of Lodovico Street the following day was that the blind had gone from the upper window. Sheets of newspaper had been taped against the glass in its place. She found herself a vantage point in the shelter of the holly edge, from which she hoped she could watch the house but remain unseen. Then she settled down for her vigil. It was not quickly rewarded. 2 hours and more went by before she saw Julia leave the house. Another hour and a quarter before she returned, by which time Kirsty's feet were numb and cold. Julia had not returned alone. The man she was with was not known to Kirsty, nor, indeed, did he look to be likely a member of Julia's circle. From a distance, he appeared to be a middle-aged, stocky, balding man. When he followed Julia into the house, he gave a nervous backward glance as if fearful of voyeurs. What?
Oh, Christopher Michael's here. Hey, dude.
What's up?
What's going on? We're glad you're okay. So.
Glad you're doing awesome now.
Yes.
She waited in her hiding place for a further quarter of an hour, not certain of what to do next. Did she linger here until the man emerged and challenge him? Or did she go to the house and try to talk her way inside? Neither option was particularly attractive. She decided not to decide. Instead, she would get closer to the house and see what inspiration that moment brought. The answer was very little. She made her way up the path. Her feet itched to turn and carry her away. Indeed, she was within an ace of doing just that when she heard a shout from within. The man's name was Sykes. Stanley Sykes.
Stan Lee? He's in everything.
Stanley. Nor was that all he'd told Julia on the way back. Excuse me. From the bar. She knew his wife's name, Maudie, the occupation, assistant chiropodist, She'd had pictures of the children, Rebecca and Ethan, provided for her to coo over. The man seemed to be defying her to continue the seduction. She merely smiled and told him he was a lucky man. But once in the house, things had begun to go awry. Halfway up the stairs, friend Sykes had suddenly announced that what they were doing was wrong, that God saw them and knew their hearts and found them wanting. She had done her best to calm him, but he was not to be won back from the Lord. Instead, he lost his temper and flailed out at her. He might have done worse had in his righteous wrath, but for the voice that had called him from the landing. He'd stop hitting her instantly and become so pale as if he believed God himself was doing the calling. Then Frank had appeared at the top of the stairs. In all his glory, Sykes had loosed a cry and tried to run, but Julia was quick. She had her hand on him long enough for Frank to descend the few stairs and make a permanent arrest. She had not realized until she heard the creak and the snap of bones as Frank took hold of his prey how strong he had become as of late. Stronger, surely, than a natural man. At Frank's touch, Sykes had shouted again. To silence him, Frank wrenched off his jaw.
Yeah.
The second shout that Kirsty had heard had ended abruptly, but she read enough panic in the din to have her at the door and on the verge of knocking. Only then did she think better of it. Instead, she slipped down the side of the house, doubting with every step the wisdom of this, but equally certain that a frontal assault would get her nowhere. The gate that offered access to the back garden was lacking a bolt. Excuse me. Is this a cold one?
Right here. Yay.
Gross, IPA.
Yeah, that's what I'm drinking.
I would have rather had that.
There's nothing in it. Is there?
There's half a beer.
Oh.
Dear God, guys. Gross.
I am yawning.
She slipped through, her ears alive with every sound, especially that of her own feet. From the house, nothing, not as much as a moan. Leaving the gate open in case she should need a quick retreat, she hurried to the back door. It was unlocked. This time, she let doubt slow her step. Maybe she should go and call Rory and bring him to the house. But by that time, whatever was happening inside would be over, and she knew damn well that unless Julia was caught red-handed, she would slide from under any accusation. No, this was the only way. She stepped inside. The house remained completely quiet. There was not even a footfall to help her locate the actors she'd come to view. Sorry, guys. She moved to the kitchen door, and from there, through the dining room, her stomach twitched. Her throat was suddenly so dry she could barely swallow, like me.
Mm-hmm.
From dining room to lounge, and thence into the hallway, still nothing. No whisper or sigh. Julia and her companion could only be upstairs, which suggested that she had been wrong, thinking she heard fear in the shouts. Perhaps it was pleasure that she'd heard. An orgasmic whoop instead of terror.
I'm laughing at you, but I put that up for Mike.
Why are you laughing at me?
Because I don't know what that part made me laugh. The orgasmic whoops or whatever it was.
Instead of the terror she'd taken it for. It was an easy mistake to make. The front door was on her right, mere yards away. She could still slip out and away. The coward in her tempted, but no one be any the wiser. But a fierce curiosity had seized her, a desire to know, to see the mysteries the house held, and be done with them. As she climbed the stairs, the curiosity mounted to a kind of exhilaration. She reached the top and began to make her way along the landing. The thought occurred now that the birds had flown, that while she had been creeping through from the back of the house, they had left via the front. The first door on the left was the bedroom. If they were meeting anywhere, Julia and her paramour, it would surely be there. But no, the door stood ajar. She peered in. The bedspread was uncreased. Then a misshapen cry, so near, so loud, her heart missed a rhythm. She ducked out of the bedroom to see a figure lurch from one of the rooms further along the landing. It took her a moment to recognize the fretful man who had arrived with Julia, and only then by his clothes. The rest was changed, horribly changed. A wasting decease had seized him in the minutes since she'd seen him on the steps, shriveling his flesh on the bone. Seeing Kirsty, he threw himself towards her, seeking what fragile protection she could offer. He had got no more than a pace from the door, however, when a form spilled into sight behind him. It too seemed deceased, its body bandaged from head to foot, the bindings sustained by tissues of blood and pus. There was nothing in its speed, however, or the ferocity of its subsequent attack that suggested sickness. Quite the reverse. It reached for the fleeing man and took hold of him by the neck. Kirsty let out a cry as the captor drew its prey back into its embrace. The victim made what little complaint his dislocated face was capable of. Then the antagonist, tightened his embrace. The body trembled and twitched. Its legs buckled. Blood spurted from the eyes and nose and mouth. Spots of it filled the air like hot hail, breaking against her brow. The sensation snapped her from her inertia. This was no time to wait and watch. She ran. The monster made no pursuit. She reached the top of the stairs without being overtaken, but as her foot descended, it addressed her. The voice was familiar. "There you are," it said. It spoke with melting tones, as if it knew her. She stopped. "Kirsty," it said. "Wait a while." Her head told her to run. Her gut defied the wisdom, however. It wanted to remember whose voice this was, speaking from the bindings. She could still make good her escape, she reasoned. She had an 8-yard start. She looked around at the figure. The body in its arms had curled up fetally, legs against the chest. The beast dropped it. "You killed him," she said. The thing nodded. And it had no apologies to make, apparently, to either victim or witness. "We'll mourn him later," it told her, and took a step towards her. "Where's Julia?" Kirsty demanded. "Don't you fret, all is well," the voice said. She was so close to remembering who it was. As she puzzled, it took another step, one hand upon the wall, as if to balance was still uncertain. "I saw you," it went on, "and I think you saw me at the window." Her mystification increased. Had this been the thing in the house that long? Had this thing been in the house that long? Wow, dyslexia.
Yeah.
Had this thing been in the house that long?
Dyslexia creeps right up on you.
If so, surely Rory must. And then she knew the voice. "Yes, you do remember. I can see you remember." It was Rory's voice, or rather, a close approximation of it. More guttural, more self-regarding, but the resemblance was uncanny enough to keep her rooted at the spot while the beast shambled within snatching distance of her. At the last, she recanted her fascination and turned to flee, but the cause was already lost. She heard its steps pace behind her, then felt its fingers at her neck. A cry came to her lips, but it was barely mounted before the thing had its corrugated palm across her face. canceling both the shout and the breath that it came upon. It plucked her up and took her back to the way she'd come. In vain she struggled against its hold. The small wounds her fingers made upon its body, tearing at the bandages and digging into the rawness beneath, left it entirely unmoved, it seemed. For a horrid moment her heels snagged the corpse on the floor. Then she was being hauled into the room from which the living and the dead had emerged. It smelled of sour milk and fresh meat. When she was flung down to the floorboards beneath her, they were wet and warm. Her belly wanted to turn inside out. She didn't fight the instinct, but retched up all that was in her stomach. In the confusion of present discomfort and anticipated horror, she was not certain of what happened next. Did she glimpse somebody else, Julia, on the landing as the door was slammed? Or was it a shadow? One way or the other, it was too late for appeals. She was alone with the nightmare. Wiped the bile from her mouth, she got to her feet. Daylight pierced the newspaper at the window from there, dappling the room like sunlight through branches. And through this pastoral, the thing came sniffing her. Come to Daddy, it said. In her 26 years, she had never heard an easier invitation to refuse. Don't touch me, she told it. It cocked its head a little, as if charmed by this show of propriety. Then it closed in on her, all pus and laughter, and God help her desire. She backed a few desperate inches into the corner until there was nowhere else for her to go. Don't you remember me? It said. She shook her head. Frank, came the reply. This is Brother Frank. She had met Frank only once, at Alexandra Road. He'd come visiting one afternoon just before the wedding. More she couldn't recall, except that she'd hated him on sight. Leave me alone, she said as it reached for her. There was a vile finesse in the way his stained fingers touched her breast. Don't, she shrieked. Or so help me. What? What will you do? Nothing was the answer, of course. She was helpless, as only she had ever been in dreams, those dreams of pursuit and assault that her psyche had always staged on a ghetto street in some eternal night. Never, not even in her most witless fantasies, had she anticipated that the arena would be a room she had walked past a dozen times, and a house where she had been happy, while outside the day went on as ever, gray on gray.
Hey, Dustin.
Hey, Dustin. Hi, Rick.
Hello, Rick Neal.
All right. In a futile gesture of disgust, she pushed the investigative hands away. Don't be cruel, the thing said, and his fingers found her skin again, as unshoeable as October wasps.
October wasp.
Well, okay.
There's some shit going on in England. I'll tell you that right now.
Well, I mean, could be worse. Could be Australia with all the crazy bugs and the spiders and the spider webs everywhere.
And the most venomous things
Everything.
ever.
The most venomous everything.
Yeah.
Sorry for y'all that live out there. All right. So what's to be frightened of? Outside, she began thinking of the horror on the landing. A man has to eat, Frank replied. Surely you can forgive me that. Why did she even feel his touch? She wondered. Why didn't her nerves share her disgust and die beneath his caress? This isn't happening, she told herself out loud. But the beast only laughed. I used to tell myself that day in, day out. Used to try to dream the agonies away. But you can't. Take it from me. You can't. They have to be endured. She knew he was telling the truth. the kind of unsavory truth that only monsters were at liberty to tell, and had no need to flatter or... Really?
What?
Cajoli?
Cajoli.
Cajole. He had no philosophy to debate or sermon to deliver. His awful nakedness was a kind of sophistication past the lies of faith and into purer realms. She knew, too, that she would not endure. That when her pleadings faltered and Frank claimed her for whatever vileness he had in mind, she would lose such a scream that she would shatter. Her very sanity was at stake here. She had no choice but to fight back, and quickly. Before Frank had a chance to press his suit any harder, her hands went up to his face, fingers gouged at his eye holes and mouth, and the flesh beneath the bandage had the consistency of jelly. It came away in globs, and with it a wet heat. The beast shouted, his grip on her relaxed. Seizing the moment, she threw herself out from under him, and the momentum carrying her against the wall with enough force to badly wind her. Again, Frank roared. She didn't waste any time enjoying his discomfort, but slid along the wall, not trusting her legs sufficiently to move into open territory toward the door. As she advanced, her feet sent an unlilled jar of preserved ginger rolling across the room, spilling syrup and fruit alike. Frank turned towards her, the bandaging about his face hanging in scarlet loops where she'd torn at it. In several places, the bone was exposed. Even now, he ran his hands over the wounds, roars of horror coming as he sought to measure the degree of his maiming. Had she blinded him? She wasn't sure. Even if she had, it was only a matter of time before he located her in this small room. And when he did, his rage would know no bounds. She had to reach the door before he oriented himself. Faint hope. She hadn't a moment to take a step before he dropped his hands from his face and scanned the room. He saw her, no doubt of that. A beat later, he was bearing down upon her with renewed violence. At her feet lay a litter of domestic items. The heaviest item among them was a plain box. She reached down, picked it up, and as she stood right there, he was upon her. She loosed a cry of defiance and swung the box, bearing fist at his head. It connected heavily. Bone splintered. The beast tottered backwards, and she launched herself towards the door. But before she reached it, the shadow swamped her once again, and she was flung backwards across the room. It came in raging pursuit. This time, he had no intention beyond the murderous. His lashes were intended to kill. That they did not was testament less to her speed than to the imprecision of his fury. Nevertheless, one out of every 3 blows caught her. Gashes opened in her face and upper chest. It was all she could do to prevent herself from fainting. As she sank beneath his assault, again she remembered the weapon she found. The box was still in her hand. She raised it to deliver another blow, but as Frank's eyes came to rest on the box, his assault abruptly ceased. There was a panting respite in which Kirsty had a chance to wonder if death might not be easier than further flight. Then Frank raised his arm towards her, unfurled his fist, and said, "Give it to me." He wanted his keepsake, it seemed, but she had no intention of relinquishing her only weapon. "No," she said. He made the demand a second time, and there was a distinct anxiety in his tone. It seemed the box was too precious for him to risk taking it by force. "One last time," he said to her. "Then I'll kill you. Give me the box." She weighed the chances. What'd she have left to lose? Say please, she said. He regarded her quizzically, a soft growl in his throat, then polite as a calculating child said, please. The word was her cue. She threw the box at the window with all the strength her trembling arm possessed. It sailed past Frank's head, shattered the glass, and disappeared from sight. No! He shrieked as the window in a heartbeat. No! No, no! She raced to the door, her legs threatening to fail her with every step. Then she was out into the landing, the stairs almost defeating her, but she clung to the banister like a geriatric and made it to the hallway without falling. Above, there was further din. He was calling after her again, but this time she would not be caught. She fled along the hallway to the front door and flung it open. The day had brightened since she'd first entered the house, a defiant burst of sunlight before evening fell. Squinting against the glare, she stared down the pathway. There was glass underfoot, and amongst the shards, her weapon. She picked it up, a souvenir of her defiance, and ran. As she reached the street proper, words began to come, a hopeless babble, fragments of things seen and felt. But Ludovico Street was deserted. So she began to run, and kept running until she could put a good distance between her and the bandaged beast. Eventually, wandering on some street she didn't recognize, somebody asked her if she needed help. The little kindness defeated her, for the effort of making some coherent reply to the inquiry was too much, and her exhausted mind lost its hold on the light.
Oh, no.
Why'd you thumbs up?
Oh, for,
Oh.
I keep that up.
2 more chapters!
We're almost there! We're gonna do it!
So this is going to be like a 2-hour show, by the way.
Well, I think we're gonna get done within there. If we can just barrel through this real fast.
But I am going to do this real fast, because my throat is really dry. Which one do we want to do? We are the Fiend Club, not you.
It's driving me insane, although you try to fight, drag from the silence where you hide, till you scream. We are the Fiend Club, not you, not you. You dress.
All right, you know what? I feel like we need to show off Audrey a little. All right.
All right. Let's get through this.
Almost done, guys. So she woke in a blizzard, or such what was her first impression. Above her, a perfect whiteness, snow on snow. She was tucked up in snow, pillowed in snow. The blankness was sickening. It seemed to fill up her throat and eyes. She raised her hands in front of her face. They smelled of an unfamiliar soap, whose perfume was harsh. Now she began to focus. The walls, the pristine sheets, the medication beside the bed. A hospital? She called out for help. Hours or minutes later, she wasn't sure which, it came in the form of a nurse who simply said, "You're awake," and went to fetch her superiors. She told them nothing when they came. She decided, in the time between the nurse's disappearance and reappearance with the doctors, that this was not a story she was ready to tell. Tomorrow, maybe. She might find the words to convince them of what she'd seen, but today, if she tried to explain, they would stroke her brow and tell her to hush her nonsense, condescending to her, and try to persuade her that it was all hallucination. If she pressed the point, they'd probably sedate her, which would make matters worse. What she needed was time to think. All of this she'd worked out before they arrived, so that when they asked her what had happened, she had her lies ready. It was all a fog. She told them she could barely remember her own name. It will come back in time, they reassured her. She replied meekly that she supposed it would. Sleep now, they said. And she told them that she'd be happy to do just that, and yawned. They withdrew then. Oh, yes, said one of them as he was about to go. I forgot. And he brought Frank's box from his pocket. You were holding onto this, he said, when you were found. We had the devil's own job getting it out of your hand. Does it mean anything to you? She said it didn't. The police have looked at it. There was blood on it, you see. Maybe yours, maybe not. He approached the bed. Do you want it? And then added, it's been cleaned. Yes, she replied. Yes, please. It may jog your memory, he told her, and put it down on the table beside her. What are you going to do? Julia demanded for the 100th time. The man in the corner said nothing, nor was there any interpretable sign of his ruin of face. What did you want to do with her anyway? She asked him. You've spoiled everything. Spoiled, said the monster. You don't know the meaning of spoiled. She swallowed her anger. His brooding unnerved her. We have to leave, Frank, she said, softening her tone. He threw a look across at her, white-hot eyes. They'll come looking, she said. She'll tell them everything, maybe. Don't you care? The bandaged lump shrugged. Yes, of course, but we can't leave, sweetheart. Sweetheart. The word mocked them both, the breath of sentiment in a room that had known only pain. Can't face the world like this. He gestured to his face. Can I? He said, staring up at her, look at me. Can I? No. No. He went back to pursuing the floor. I need skin, Julia. A skin? Well, then maybe we can go dancing together. Isn't that what you want? He spoke of both dancing and death with equal nonchalance, as though one carried as little significance as the other. It calmed her, hearing him talk that way. How, she said at last, meaning how can a skin be stolen, but also how will our sanity survive? There are ways, he said, the flayed face and blew her a kiss. Blew her a kiss. Had it not been for the white walls, she might never have picked up the box. Had there been a picture to look at, a vase of sunflowers, or a view of pyramids, anything to break the monotony of the room, she would have been content to stare at it and think. But the blankness was too much. It gave her no handhold on sanity, so she reached across to the table beside the bed and picked up the box. It was heavier than she remembered. She had to sit up on the bed to examine it. There was little enough to see. No lid that she could find, no keyhole, no hinges. If she turned it over once, she turned it 100 times, finding no clue of how it might be opened. It was not solid, she was certain of that, so logic demanded that there was a way to be into it. But where? She tapped it, shook it, pulled and pressed it, without results. It was not until she rolled over in bed and examined it in the full glare of the lamp that she discovered some clue as to how the box was constructed. There were infinitesimal cracks in the sides of the box where one piece of the puzzle abutted the next. They would have been invisible, but that a residual of blood remained in them, tracing the complex relation of the parts. Systematically, she began to feel her way over the sides, testing her hypothesis by pushing and pulling once more. The cracks offered her a general geography of the toy. Without them, she might have wandered the six sides forever, but the options were significantly reduced by the clues she'd found. There were only so many ways the box could be made to come apart. After a time, her patience was rewarded. A click, and suddenly one of the compartments was sliding out from beside its lacquered neighbors. Within, there was beauty, polished surfaces with scintillated like the finest mother of pearl colored shadows seeming to move in the gloss. And there was music, too. A simple tune emerged from the box, playing on a mechanism that she could not yet see. Enchanted, she delved further. Though one piece had been removed, the rest did not come readily. Each segment presented a fresh challenge to fingers and mind, and victories rewarded with further filigree added to the tune. She was coaxing the fourth section out by an elaborate series of turns and counter turns when she heard the bell. She stopped working and looked up. Something was wrong. Either her weary eyes were playing tricks, or the blizzard white walls had moved subtly out of true. She put down the box and slipped out of bed to go to the window. The bell still rang, the solemn tolling. She drew back the curtains a few inches. It was night and windy. Leaves migrated across the hospital lawn. Moths congregated in the lamplight. Unlikely as it seemed, the sound of the bell wasn't coming from outside. It was behind her. She let the curtains drop and turned back into the room. And as she did so, the bulb in the bedside light guttered like a living flame. Instinctively, she reached for the pieces of the box. They and these strange events were intertwined somehow, and her hand found the fragments. The light blew out. She was not left in darkness, however, nor was she alone. There was a soft phosphorescence at the end of the bed, and in its folds, a figure. The condition of its flesh guarded her imagination, the hooks, the scars, yet its voice, when it spoke, was not that of a creature in pain. It's called the Licherman configuration, it said, pointing at the box. She looked down. The pieces were no longer in her hand, but floating inches above her palm. Miraculously, the box was reassembled itself without visible aid, the pieces sliding back together as the whole construction turned over and over. As it did, so she caught fresh glimpses of the polished interior and seemed to see ghost faces, twisted as if by grief or bad glass, howling back at her. Then all but one of the segments was sealed up, and the visitor was claiming her attention afresh. The box is a means to break the surface of the real, a kind of invocative by which we Cenobites can be notified. Who? You did it in ignorance, the visitor said. Am I right? Yes. It's happened before, came the reply, but there's no help for it. No way to seal the schism until we take what's ours. This is a mistake, she said. Don't try to fight it. It's quite beyond your control. You have to accompany me. She shook her head. She'd had enough of bullying nightmares to last her a lifetime. I won't go with you, she said. Damn you, I won't. As she spoke, the door opened. A nurse she didn't recognize, a member of the night staff, presumably, was standing there. Did you call out? She asked. Kirsty looked at the Cenobite and then back at the nurse. They stood no more than a yard apart. She doesn't see me, it told her, nor hear me. I belong to you, Kirsty, and you to me. No, she said. Are you sure? I thought I heard. Kirsty shook her head. It was lunacy, all lunacy. You should be in bed, the nurse chided. You'll catch your death. The Cenobite tittered. I'll be back in 5 minutes, said the nurse. Please go back to sleep. And she was gone again. We'd better go, it said. Leave them to their patchwork, eh? Such a depressing place. You can't do this, she insisted. It moved towards her nevertheless. A row of tiny bells, depending from the scraggly flesh of its neck, tinkled as it approached. The stink it gave off made her want to heave. Wait, she said. No tears, please. It's a waste of good suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah,
there's the line.
I love that line. The box, she said in desperation. Don't you want to know where I got the box? Not particularly. Frank Cotton, she said. Does the name mean anything to you, Frank Cotton? The Cenobite smiled. Oh, yes, we know Frank. He solved the box, too, am I right? He wanted pleasure until we gave it to him. Then he squirmed. If I took you to him? He's alive, then? Very much alive. And you're proposing what? That I take him back instead of you? Yes, yes, why not? Yes. The Cenobite moved away from her. The room sighed. I'm tempted, it said. Then, but perhaps you're cheating me. Perhaps this is a lie to buy you time. I know where he is, for God's sake. He did this to me. She presented her the slashed arms for its pursual. If you're lying, if you're trying to squirm your way out of this, I'm not. Deliver him alive to us, then. She wanted to weep with relief. Make him confess himself, and maybe we won't tear your soul apart. Final chapter!
We're almost there. Almost there.
Hold this for a second.
Okay.
Oh. I had just taken a shower before we started this, so.
How many more pages? 164. Oh, crap.
30 pages.
20 pages. 25 pages left.
We got this, guys.
We're going to do this. We're going to get through this.
Rory stood in the hallway and stared at Julia, his Julia, the woman he had once sworn to have and to hold till death do they part. It had not seemed such a difficult promise to keep at the time. He had idolized her for as long as he could remember, dreaming of her by night and spending the days composing love poems of wild ineptitude to her. But things had changed, and he had learned, as he watched them change, that the greatest torments were often the subtlest. There had been times of late when he would have preferred a death by wild horses to the itch of suspicion that had so degraded his joy. Now, as he looked at her standing at the bottom of the stairs, it was impossible for him to even remember how good things had once been. All was doubt and dirt. One thing he was glad of, she looked troubled. Maybe that meant that there was a confession in the air, indiscretions that she would pour out and that he would forgive her for, in a welter of tears and understanding. You look sad, he said. She hesitated and then said, It's difficult, Rory. What is it? She seemed to want to give up before she began. What is it? He pressed. I have so much to tell you. Her hand, he saw, was grasping the banister so tightly the knuckles burned white. I'm listening, he said. He would love her again if she'd just be honest with him. Tell me, he said. I think maybe it would be easier if I just showed you, she told him. And so, saying, led him up the stairs. The wind that harried the streets was not warm. To judge by the way the pedestrians drew their collars up and their faces down, but Kirsty didn't feel the chill. Was it her invisible companion who kept the cold from her? cloaking her with that fire the ancients had conjured to burn sinners in. Either that, or she was too frightened to feel anything. But then, that wasn't how she felt. She wasn't frightened. The feeling in her gut was far more ambiguous. She had opened a door, the same door Rory's brother had opened, and now she was walking with demons. And at the end of her travels, she would have her revenge. She would find the thing that had torn her and tormented her and make him feel the powerlessness that she had suffered. She would watch him squirm. More, she would enjoy it. Pain had made a sadist of her. As she made her way along Ludovico Street, she looked around for a sign of the Cenobite, but he was nowhere to be seen. Undaunted, she approached the house. She had no plan in mind. There were too many variables to be juggled. For one, would Julia be there? And if so, how involved in all of this was she? Impossible to believe that she would be an innocent bystander. But perhaps she had acted out of terror of Frank. The next few minutes might furnish the answers. She rang the bell and waited. The door was answered by Julia. In her hand, a length of white lace. Kirsty, she said, apparently unfazed by her appearance. It's late. Where's Rory? Kirsty asked. They hadn't been quite what she'd intended, but they came out unbidden. He's here, as if seeking to soothe some manic child. Is there something wrong? I'd like to see him. Rory? Yes. She stepped over the threshold without waiting for an invitation. Julia made no objections, but closed the door behind her. Only now did Kirsty feel the chill. She stood in the hallway and shivered. You look terrible, Julia said plainly. I was here this afternoon, she blurted. I saw what happened, Julia. I saw. What was there to see? You know. Truly, I don't. I want to speak to Rory. Of course. But take care with him, will you? He's not feeling very well. She led Kirsty through to the dining room. Rory was sitting at the table. There was a glass of spirits in his hand. Bottle beside it. Laid across the adjacent chair was Julia's wedding dress. The sight of it prompted recognition of the lace swath in her hand, and it was the bride's veil. Rory looked much worse for the wear. There was dried blood on his face, and at his hairline, the smile he offered was warm but fatigued. What happened? She asked him. It's all right now, Kirsty, he said. His voice barely aspired to a whisper. Julia told me everything, and it's all right. No, she said, knowing that he couldn't possibly know the whole story. You came here this afternoon, that's right. That was unfortunate. You asked me. She glanced at Julia, who was standing at the door, then back at Rory. I did what I thought you wanted. Yes, I know. I'm only sorry you were dragged into this terrible business. You know what your brother's done, she said.
Real fast. Angie, we are on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different pages right now. Just to let you know.
So no.
Yeah, no.
Everybody didn't leave. I'm just not responding.
We've been reading, trying to get through this book. We have a lot of links up right now. Because we actually use StreamYard to actually reach people. Because we actually do our job. We're consistent.
PIP. Nice. Thanks, Mikey.
Christopher Michael, you're fucking awesome. One of our awesome editors.
Yeah, he's been doing such a great job with everything that he does for us, honestly. Let's see. You know what your brother's done? She said. You know what he summoned? I know enough, Rory replied. The point is, it's over now. What do you mean? Whatever he did to you, I'll make amends. What do you mean, over? He's dead, Kirsty. Deliver him alive, and maybe we won't tear your soul apart. Dead? We destroyed him, Julia and I. It wasn't so difficult. He thought he could trust me. You see, thought that blood was thicker than water. Well, it isn't. I wouldn't suffer a man like that to live. She felt something twitch in her belly. Had the Cenobite got their hooks in her already? Snagged the carpet of her bowels? You've been kind, Kirsty, risking so much coming back here. There was something at her shoulder. Give me your soul, it said. I'll go to the authorities when I feel a little stronger. Try and find a way to make them understand. You killed him? She said. Yes. I don't believe it. Take her upstairs, Rory said to Julia. Show her. Do you want to see? Julia inquired. Kirsty nodded and followed. It was warmer on the landing than below, and the air greasy and gray, like filthy dishwater. The door to Frank's room was ajar. The thing that lay on the bare boards in a tangle of torn bandages still steamed. His neck was clearly broken, his head set askew on his shoulders. He was devoid of skin from head to foot. Kirsty looked away, nauseated. Satisfied? Julia asked. Kirsty didn't reply, but left the room and stepped into the landing. At her shoulder, the air was restless. You lost, something said, close to her. I know, she muttered. The bell began to ring, tolling for her. Surely, and a turmoil of wings nearby, a carnival of carrion birds. She hurried down the stairs, praying that she wouldn't be overtaken before she reached the door. If they tore her heart out, let Rory be spared the sight. Let him remember her strong with laughter on her lips. Not please. Behind her, Julia said, Where are you going? When there was no reply forthcoming, she went on talking. Don't say anything to anyone, Kirsty. We can deal with this, Rory and me. Her voice had stirred Rory from his drink. He appeared in the hallway. The wounds Frank had inflicted looked more severe than Kirsty had first thought. His face was bruised in a dozen places, and the skin on his neck was plowed up. As she came abreast of him, he reached out and took her arm. Julia's right, he said. Leave it to us to report, will you? There were so many things she wanted to tell him at that moment, but time left the room for none. The bell was getting louder in her head. Someone had looped their entrails around her neck and was pulling the knot tight. It's too late, she murmured to Rory and pressed his hand away. What do you mean? He said to her as she covered the yards to the door. Don't go, Kirsty, not yet. Tell me what you mean. She couldn't help but offer him a backwards glance, hoping that he would find in her face all the regrets she felt.
Due to that book, I learned new words. Right? Freaking Clive Barker, man. He's fucking awesome.
It was Stephen King that made me have to look up a lot of words.
At Lovecraft, I still to this day I can't have it flow in my head when I read. I can read certain parts of Lovecraft, but I have to read his stories multiple times to actually really, really get it.
Yeah, I get that.
But Richard Lehman, on the other hand, very straightforward and very much to the point. I keep talking about. He's my favorite author.
So she couldn't help but offer him a backwards glance, hoping that he would find in her face all the regrets she felt. It's all right, he said sweetly, still hoping to heal her. Really it is. He opened his arms. Come to Daddy, he said. The phrase didn't sound right out of Rory's mouth. Some boys never grew to be daddies. However, many children they sired. Kirsty put out a hand to the wall to steady herself. It wasn't Rory who was speaking to her. It was Frank. Somehow it was Frank. She held on the thought through the mounting din of bells, so loud now that her skull seemed to be ready to crack open. Rory was still smiling at her, arms extended. He was talking too. But she could no longer hear what he said. The tender flesh of his face shaped the words, but the bells drowned them out. She was thankful for the fact that it made it easier to defy the evidence of her eyes. I know who you are, she said suddenly. Not certain of whether her words were audible or not, but unquenchably sure that they were true. Rory's corpse was upstairs, left to lie in Frank's shunned bandages. The usurped skin was now wed to his brother's body. The marriage sealed with the letting of blood. Yes, that was it. The coils around her throat were tightening. It could only be moments before they dragged her off. In desperation, she started back along the hallway towards the thing in Rory's face. It's you, she said. The face smiled at her, undismayed. She reached out and snatched at him. Startled, he took a step backwards to avoid her touch, moving with graceful sloth, but somehow still managing to avoid her touch. The bells were intolerable. They were pulping her thoughts, tolling her brain tissue to dust, and the rim of her sanity. She reached again for him, and this time he did not quite avoid her. Her nails raked the flesh of the skin, and the skin, so recently grafted, slid away like silk. The blood-buttered meat beneath came into horrid view. Behind her, Julia screamed, and suddenly the bells weren't in Kirsty's head any longer. They were in the house, in the world. The hallway lights burned dazzlingly bright, and then their filaments overloaded and went out. There was a short period of total darkness, during which time she heard a whimpering that may or may not have come from her own lips. Then it was as if fireworks were spluttering into life in the walls and the floor, and the hallway danced. One moment, an abattoir, the walls running scarlet. The next, a boudoir, powder blue, canary yellow. The moment following that, a ghost train tunnel, all speed, sudden fire. By one flaring light, she saw Frank moving toward her, Rory's discarded face hanging from his jaw. She avoided his outstretched arm and ducked through the front room. The hold on her throat had relaxed. She realized the Cenobites had apparently seen the error of their ways. Soon they would intervene, surely, and bring an end to this farce of mistaken identities. She would not wait to see. Frank claimed, as she'd thought of doing, she'd had enough. Instead, she'd flee the house by the back door and leave them to it. Her optimism was short-lived. The fireworks in the hallway threw some light ahead of her into the dining room, enough to see that it was already bewitched. There was something moving over the floor, like ash before wind, and chains cavorting in the air. Innocent she might be, but the forces loose were indifferent to such trivialities. She sensed that to take another step would invite the atrocities. Her hesitation put her back within Frank's reach, but as he snatched at her, the fireworks in the hallway faltered, and she slipped away from him under cover of darkness. The respite was all too brief. New lights were already blooming in the hall, and he was after her afresh, blocking her route to the front door. Why didn't they claim him, for God's sake? Hadn't she brought them here as she'd promised and unmasked him? Frank opened his jacket. In his belt was a bloodied knife, doubtless the flaying edge. He pulled it out and pointed it at Kirsty.
She's watched all the Phil movies.
From now on, he said as he stalked her. I'm Rory. She had no choice but to back away from him. The door escaped sanity, receding with every step. Understand me? I'm Rory now, and nobody's ever going to know any better. Her heel hit the bottom of the stair, and suddenly there were other hands on her, reaching through the banisters and seizing fistfuls of her hair. She twisted her head around and looked up. It was Julia, of course, face slack, all passion consumed. She wrenched Christie's head back, exposing her throat as Frank's knife gleamed towards it. At the last moment, Kirsty reached up above her head and snatched a hold of Julia's arm, wrenching her from her perch on the fourth stair. Losing both her balance and grip on her victim, Julia let out a shout and fell, and her body coming between Kirsty and Frank's thrust. The blade was too close to be averted. It entered Julia's side to the hilt. She moaned, then she reeled away down the hall, the knife buried in her. Frank scarcely seemed to notice. His eyes were on Kirsty once again. They shone with horrendous appetite. She had nowhere to go but up. The fireworks still exploding, the bells still ringing. She started to mount the stairs. Her tormentor was not coming in immediate pursuit, she saw. Julia's appeals for help had diverted him to where she lay. Halfway between the stairs and front door, he drew the knife from her side. She cried out in pain, and as if to assist her, he went down on his haunches beside her body. She raised her arm to him, looking for tenderness. In response, he cupped his hand beneath her head and drew her up towards him. As their faces came within inches of each other, Julia seemed to realize that Frank's intentions were far from honorable. She opened her mouth to scream, but he sealed her lips with his and began to feed. She kicked and scratched the air, all in vain, tearing her eyes from the sight of this depravity. Christy crawled up to the head of the stairs. The second floor offered no real hiding place, of course, nor was there any escape route except to leap from one of the windows. But having seen the cold comfort Frank had just offered his mistress, jumping was clearly the preferable option. The fall might break every bone in her body, but it would at least deprive the monster from further sustenance. The fireworks were fizzling out, it seemed. The landing was in smoky darkness. She stumbled along it rather than walked, her fingertips moving along the wall. Downstairs, she heard Frank on the move again. He was finished with Julia. Now he spoke as he began up the stairs. The same incestuous invitation. Come to Daddy. It occurred to her that the Cenobites were probably viewing this chase with no little amusement and would not act until there was only one player left, Frank. She was forfeit to their pleasure. Bastards, she breathed, and hoped they heard. She had almost reached the end of the landing. Ahead lay the junk room. Did it have a window sizable enough for her to climb through? If so, she would jump and curse them as she fell. Curse them all, God and the devil, and whatever lay between. Curse them as she dropped. Hope for nothing but that the concrete be quick with her. Frank was calling her again, and almost at the top of the stairs. She turned the key in the lock, opened the junk room door, and slipped through. Yes, there was a window. It was uncurtained. The moonlight fell through it in shafts of indecent beauty, illuminating a chaos of furniture and boxes. She made her way through the confusion to the window. It was wedged open an inch or two to air the room. She put her fingers under the frame and tried to heave it up far enough for her to climb out, but the sash in the window had rotted, and her arms were not the equal to the task. She quickly hunted for a makeshift lever, a part of her mind coolly calculating the number of steps it would take her pursue her to cover the length of the landing. Less than 20, she concluded, as she pulled the sheet off one of the tea chests, only to find a dead man staring up at her from the chest, eyes wild. He was broken in a dozen places, arms smashed and bent back upon them, legs tucked up to his chin. As she went to cry out, she heard Frank at the door. "Where are you?" He clamped her hand She clamped her hand over her face to stop the cry of revulsion from coming. As she did so, the door handle turned. She ducked out of sight behind a fell armchair, swallowing her scream. The door opened. She heard Frank's breath, slightly labored, heard the hollow pad of his feet on the boards. Then the sound of the door began being pulled to again. It clicked. Silence. She waited for a count of 13, then peeped out of hiding, half expecting to see him still in the room with her, waiting for her to break cover. But no, he'd gone. Swallowing the breath her cry had been mounting upon had brought an unwelcome side effect. Hiccups. The first of them, so unexpected she had no time to subdue it, sounded like gun crack loud. But there was no returning step from the landing. Frank, it seemed, was already out of earshot. As she returned to the window, skirting the tea chest coffin, a second hiccup startled her. She silently reprimanded her belly, but in vain. A third and a fourth came unbidden, while she wrestled once more to lift the window. That too was a fruitless effort. It had no intention of compliance. Briefly, she contemplated breaking the glass and yelling for help, but rapidly discarded the idea. Frank would be eating out her eyes before the neighbors had even shaken off sleep. Instead, she retraced her steps to the door and opened it, creaking fraction. There was no sign of Frank so far as her eyes were able to interpret the shadows. Cautiously, she opened the door a little wider and stepped into the landing once again. The gloom was like a living thing. It smothered her with murky kisses. She advanced 3 paces without incident, and then a fourth. On the 5th, her lucky number, her body took a turn for the suicidal. She hiccuped, her hand too tardy to reach her mouth before the din was out. This time, it did not go unheard. "There you are," said a shadow, and Frank slipped from the bedroom to block her path. He was vaster for his meal. He seemed as wide as the landing. He stank of meat. With nothing to lose, she screamed blue murder. Blue murder.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's an English term.
All right. Not
blue murder.
Not bloody murder?
Not blue waffles.
Yeah, no.
Blue murder.
I'm going to say bloody murder. She screamed bloody murder as he came to her. He was unashamed by her terror. With inches between her flesh and his knife, she threw herself sideways and found the 5th step had brought her abreast of Frank's room. She stumbled through the open door. He was after her in a flash, crowing his delight. There was a window in this room. She knew. She'd broken it herself mere hours before, but the darkness was so profound she might have been blindfolded. Not even a glimmer of moonlight to feed her sight. Frank was equally lost, it seemed. He called after her in this pitch, the whine of his knife accompanying his call as he slit the air, back and forth, stepping away from the sound. Her foot caught in the tangle of the bandages on the floor. Next moment, she was toppling. It wasn't the boards she fell heavily upon, however, but the greasy bulk of Rory's corpse. It won a howl of terror from her. "There you are," Frank said. The knife slices were suddenly closer, inches from her head, but she was deaf to them. She had her arms about the body beneath her, and approaching death was nothing beside the pain she felt now touching him. Rory, she mourned, content that his name be on her lips when the cut came. That's right, said Frank. Rory. Somehow, the theft of Rory's name was as unforgivable as stealing his skin, or so her grief told her. A skin was nothing. Pigs had skins, snakes had skins. They were knitted of dead cells, shed and grown and shed again. But a name, that was a spell which summoned memories. She would not let Frank usurp it. Rory's dead, she said. The word stung her with the sting, the ghost of a thought. Hush, baby, he told her. Suppose the Cenobites were waiting for Frank to name himself. Hadn't the visitor in the hospital said something about Frank confessing? You're not Rory, she said. We know that, came a reply, but nobody else does. Who are you then? Poor baby. Losing your mind, aren't you? Good thing, too. Who thought? It's safer that way. Who? Hush, baby, he said. He was stooping to her in the darkness, his face within inches of hers. Everything's going to be as right as rain. Yes? Yes, Frank's here, baby. Frank. That's right, I'm Frank. So saying, he delivered the killing blow, but she heard it coming in the darkness and dodged its benediction. A second later, the bell began again, and the bare bulb in the middle of the room flickered into life. By it, she saw Frank beside his brother, the knife buried in the dead man's buttocks. As he worked it out of the wound, he set his eyes on her afresh. Another chime, and he was up and would have been at her, but for the voice. It said his name lightly, as if calling a child to play. Frank. His face dropped for a second that night, or for a second time that night. A look of puzzlement flitted across it, and on its heels, horror. Slowly, he turned his head around to look at the speaker. It was the Cenobite, its hooks sparkling. Behind it, Kirsty saw three other figures, their anatomies catalogs of disfigurement. Frank threw a glance back at Kirsty. You did this, he said. She nodded. Get out of here, said one of the newcomers. This isn't your business now. Whore! Frank screamed at her. Bitch! Cheating fucking bitch!
Just get right into the slut shaming, right?
How is she cheating?
He fucked up.
Right? The hail of rage followed her across the room to the door. As her palm closed around the door handle, she heard him coming after her and turned to find that he was standing less than a foot from her, the knife a hair's breadth from her body. But there he was fixed, unable to advance another millimeter. They had their hooks in him. The flesh in his arms and legs curled through the meat of his face, attached to the hooks, chains, which they held taut. There was a soft sound as his resistance drew the barbs through his muscle. His mouth was dragged wide, his neck and chest plowed open. The knife dropped from his fingers. He expelled at a last incoherent curse at her. His body shuddered now as he lost his battle with their claim upon him. Inch by inch, he was drawn back towards the middle of the room. Go, said the voice of the Cenobite. She could see them no longer. They were already lost behind the blood-flecked air. Accepting their invitation, she opened the door, while behind her Frank began to scream. As she stepped into the landing, plaster dust cascaded from the ceiling. The house was growling from basement to eaves. She had to go quickly, she knew, before whatever demons were loose here shook the place apart. But though time was short, she could not prevent herself from snatching one look at Frank, to be certain that he would come after her no longer. He was in extremis, hooked through in a dozen or more places. Flesh wounds gouged him even as she watched. Spread-eagled beneath the solitary bulb, body hauled into the limits of its endurance and beyond, he gave vent to shrieks that would have won pity from her had she not learned better. Jesus Christ, are we still going here?
It's almost done. We are almost done.
Suddenly his cries stopped. There was a pause, and then one last act of defiance. He cranked up his heavy head and stared at her, meeting her gaze with eyes from which all bafflement and all malice had fled. They glittered as they rested on her, pearls of awful. In response, the chains were drawn an inch tighter, but the Cenobites gained no further cry from him. Instead, he put his tongue out at Kirsty and flicked it back and forth across his teeth in a gesture of unrepentant lewdness. He had come unsown, his limbs separated from his torso, and his head from his shoulders in a welter of bone shards and heat. She threw the door closed as something thudded against it from the other side. His head, she guessed. Then she staggered downstairs with wolves howling in the walls and the bells in turmoil, and everywhere, thickening in the air, little smoke, the ghost of wounded birds sewn wing tip to tip, and the loss of flight. She reached the bottom of the stairs and began along the hallway to the front door, but as she came within spitting distance of freedom, she heard somebody call her name. It was Julia. There was blood on the hall floor, marking a trail from the spot where Frank had abandoned her through into the dining room. Kirsty, she called again. It was a pitiable sound, and despite the wing-choked air, she could not help but go in pursuit of it. Stepping through into the dining room, the furniture was smoldering charcoal. The ash that had glimpsed was a foul-smelling carpet. And there, in the middle of the domestic wasteland, sat a bride. By some extraordinary act of will, Julia had managed to put on her wedding dress and secure her veil upon her head. Now she sat in the dirt, the dress besmirched, but she looked radiant nevertheless, more beautiful indeed, for the fact of the ruin that surrounded her. "Help me," she said, and only now did Kirsty realize that the voice she heard was not coming from beneath the lush veil, but from the bride's lap. And now the copious folds of the dress were parting, and there was Julia's head, set on a pillow of scarlet silk, and framed with a fall of auburn hair, bereft of lungs. How could it speak? It spoke nevertheless. Kirsty, it said. It begged.
Because when they come in.
And sighed, and rolled back and forth in the bride's lap, as if it hoped to unlodge its reason. Kirsty might have aided it, might have snatched the head up and dashed out its brains, but the bride's veil had started to twitch. It was rising now, as if plucked by invisible fingers. Beneath it, a light flickered, and grew brighter and brighter yet, and with the light a voice. "I'm the engineer," it sighed. "No more than that." Then the fluted folds rose higher, and the head beneath gained the brilliance of a minor sun. She did not wait for the blaze to blind her. Instead, she backed out into the hallway, the birds almost solid now, the wolves insane, and flung herself at the front door even as the hallway ceiling began to give way. The night came to meet her, a clean darkness. She breathed it in greedy gulps as she departed the house at a run. It was her second such departure. God help her, her sanity, that there would ever be a third. At the corner of Lodovico Street, She looked back, and the house had not capitulated to the forces of are unleashed upon it. It stood now as quiet as a grave, no quieter. As she turned away, somebody collided with her. She yelped with surprise, but the huddled pedestrian was already hurrying away into the anxious murk that preceded morning. As the figure hovered on the outskirts of the solidity, it glanced back, and its head flared in gloom, a cone of white fire. It was the engineer. She had no time to look away. It was gone, again in one instant, leaving its glamour in her eye. Only then did she realize the purpose of the collision. Limerton's box had been passed back to her, sat in her hand. Its surfaces had been immaculately resealed and polished to high gloss. Though she did not examine it, she was certain there would be no clue to its solution left. The next discoverer would voyage its face without a chart, and until such time she was elected its keeper? Apparently so. She turned it over in her hand. For the frailest of moments, she seemed to see ghosts in the lacquer, Julia's face, and that of Frank. She turned it over again, looking to see if Rory's was in there, but no. Wherever he was, it wasn't there. There were other puzzles, perhaps, that if solved gave access to the place where he lodged. A crossword, maybe, whose solution would lift the latch of Paradise Garden, or a jigsaw, and the completion of which lay access to Wonderland. She would wait and watch, as she laid always watching and waited, hoping that such a puzzle would one day come to her, but if it failed to show itself, she would not grieve too deeply, for fear that the mending of broken hearts be a puzzle neither wit nor time had the skill to solve.
And that's that.
We are finally done.
So, to go back on this real fast, they actually do show the second one was the one where they actually, in the second movie, they actually go and what, yeah, he opened the box, I came. The second movie, I think it was called Hell on Earth, or no, whatever it was, when Julia came back in the movie, they showed actually what really happens. It's not that they come to our world, that you actually go to their world. That's the reason why, like the first movie didn't really do it justice because it just showed everything crashing down. But what really happened is that she was actually in hell the whole time. And
they knew she shouldn't have been.
Well, no. If she didn't deliver,
I'm talking about Kirsty.
Oh no! If she didn't deliver, she was going to be in hell because she did even in the movie, she does accidentally open the box. Yeah. And if you open the box, you have to go with them. So
if you open the box, they come.
They come. But that is it's actually pretty cool. Like they didn't really show in the movies. They didn't show the engineer until the second movie, which the engineer possessed like the psychiatrist guy. I can't remember, but yeah, it was actually it was pretty cool. Like how they actually show this. The official Hellbound Heart. There is I don't think he put a sequel out. I think he did put a sequel out. I think it was like a few years ago though.
Where did the Tales of the where'd the other book go?
Scary Stories?
No. The other Clive Barker book that I just pulled out.
The Book of Blood?
Yeah.
I don't know. So, yeah.
All right, guys. Thank you so much.
We finished this finally. But yeah. Go watch the movies.
And we're going to be continuing the band book club. We're working on it. We're getting things together. We're figuring out what exactly we want to do here. We're not expecting people to go out and buy things. We want to give them the opportunity to listen to them.
I have a whole library right now, basically, of slasher novels and stuff that wouldn't be sold, or not sold, but wouldn't be put into, school libraries. So that's the whole idea of this. It's what you can't find in a library.
Books that have been previously banned, books that are banned. It's really hard to find Clive Barker books. It's really hard to find Richard Lehman.
Well, Lehman was a special case because he's American, and his books were so graphic in the late 70s when they first started coming out that a lot of the vast majority of American publishers.
Oh, thank you, Angie.
The vast majority of American publishers would not put them out here. So European publishers were able to get them out for a long time. I can't remember the publisher that finally started putting his books out in the mid 2000s, like 2009, 2010. It was pretty crazy to actually see them and to actually put them out in unedited, everything like that. Because another thing that would happen with Richard Lehman is that they would, if they did put stuff out here in America, mind you, he was from Ohio and he lived in Los Angeles, but all this stuff was being put out in Europe. They would edit it. They would edit the fuck out of it because it was so graphic, and they're like, "Oh, we can't put this out here; it's not going to sell." Turns out it sold left and right the minute they actually put unedited versions out. So
next band book club, I believe we are going to be doing a Edgar Allan Poe story.
Yep.
Either The Mask of the Red Death, The Pit and the Pendulum, or even The Oval Portrait, which is my personal favorite.
I'd like to eventually do a Richard Lehman book, but he's only got a couple novellas. For us, I'd like to try to. There's going to be eventually other contributors.
We're going to have other people doing this. Some are going to feel more comfortable reading the book and then
just
going over it with you guys. Me, I like reading them to people and giving them, the full effect if possible. But there's going to be some books that are just too fucking long to do this. Like
when I read a Richard Lehman book, it's mostly going to be notes.
This is
because they're
this book was only 160 pages, guys,
and it took 2-hour-long episodes, and right now we're at almost 2 hours to finish it up. It's a lot to read because honestly, I drink and I start talking crap.
Also, like if I'm reading it to myself, I'm going to read it much louder.
Oh yeah,
or much faster. I mean, much louder. I scream it in my room.
In my head, I read a lot. Excuse me. In my head, I read a lot faster, but when I'm reading out loud, I second guess myself a lot, and
I just like to enunciate.
Yeah, I don't do it right. So that's that. We're gonna play a couple things for you, and we're out.
So thank you everybody for joining us. Next Monday we will be doing some Edgar Allan Poe.
Mother de Mort, she is not on this.
She's not going to be on, but she will. We're going to have throughout this week. Keep an eye on Psycho Bunny Death Cult, Psycho Bunny DC, and Psychomantium 13 because we are going to be doing shows throughout the whole week. Some of them are going to be wholesome. Some of them are going to be fun and creepy. And it just gives you a little glimpse into who we really are on our favorite holiday.
Yeah, Sid's got his 2 shows.
Sid's going to do
and Saturday,
maybe even an extra show throughout the week.
That'd be cool.
And then I know we're going to do a show.
We're doing
probably tomorrow night when we're carving pumpkins. We'll put on a little something.
Yep.
And then throughout the day on Halloween, we're gonna probably go live about 3 times.
Yeah. Sid's on it.
Yeah, I read The Raven actually the other night, Angie.
Yeah, The Raven's good.
That's my favorite. I used to have it memorized.
Yeah, we were reading. What was it? We did Scary Stories too. We did like kind of back and forth.
It's just that word obeisance I had to remember.
Yeah. Saturday, yeah, we're gonna do. Speaking of wholesome, we're going. Yeah, you just said it. Yeah, we're going to.
We're going to go to Murray Family Farms, which is a really cool, like, family area that around here. They have a pumpkin patch. They have a corn maze. You can
orchards, everything.
You can pick apples, and they have such good fruits and like nuts and stuff there. And we're coming home with pumpkins and some fruits. Yeah. And then we'll do something a little bit spookier for our actual show.
But Sid has Into the Fire on Friday night and Saturday night.
So Friday night with us, Saturday night with WLFEDB. And then we're going to be doing Saturday night as well.
Random show.
For the random show. And then on Sunday, we're continuing Gacy with WLFEDB.
I think we might finish up Gacy on Sunday night.
I think so. I can skip through a few of those things.
Yeah, we got a lot of those on him.
So thank you all, and have a wonderful night.
Yeah.
Hold on.
It's bedtime.
This is Mr. Applewhite speaking. Do not attempt to adjust your device. There is nothing wrong with it. I am here to deliver a message. Join Psycho Bunny Death Cult in our anti-censorship campaign. Free your mind. Free your head.